Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the first of 8 sessions of Shifter, in which we're going to be delving into different facets of the subject of waiting. My name is Natalie Bell, and I'm the curator at MIT List Center. And on behalf of the List and our co-host, Contemporary Art Center Cincinnati, I'm really happy to welcome Rit Premnath and Avi Alpert, the co-editors of Shifter and the brilliant conveners of this program, and also Lauren Williams and Lupe Maravilla, who are our presenters tonight. I want to also note quickly that following their presentations, we're going to be using the Q&A function in Zoom to field your questions. So please feel free to log your thoughts and queries that way, and we'll look forward to hearing from you all. And I also hope that you'll join us for our next program on Thursday, October 8th, which you'll hear a little bit more from at the end of this program. So thank you, and I'm going to pass it to you, Rit.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rit Premnath, and I, along with Avi Alpert, co-edit the publication and discursive platform Shifter. Shifter is a series of public programs which unravels into a publication. This issue will launch next September, a year from now. I really want to begin by thanking Natalie Bell and Amara Antilla, curators of MIT List Visual Arts Center and Contemporary Arts Center Cincinnati, for inviting us in the first place. Thank you so much. And also many thanks to Emily Garner and David Siegel, who have helped in actually facilitating this event. Thank you so much. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Avi, who will introduce tonight's speakers.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Rit. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, everyone, for being here and working with us as we go through this new experiment in kind of virtual public. As Rit said, we've been doing these public conversations for about actually 6 years now. We began with a dictionary project. We did a project on learning and unlearning, and now we moved on to the theme of waiting. A lot of the idea has been to get together to think about things that we experience every day in our lives, whether that's some kind of learning or whether it's the language that we use, but we don't always have time to reflect on. And Rit, for some time, I think, has been working on this concept of waiting that ties into the shows he'll be presenting at MIT and CCA. And we agreed that this was really a moment when the concept of waiting was something hovering in our lives, both its cruelty and its potential for hope. And it was something that we could really think through as an experience in itself. And we sent out a call, and we got a wonderful series of responses from a number of people who will be doing these sessions over the next 8 months. And so tonight, let me introduce the first two. They'll speak for about 10 minutes each, and then respond to each other briefly, and then Rit will moderate the Q&A. So I'll introduce our second speaker first, which is Guadalupe Maravilla. Guadalupe Maravilla creates fictionalized performances, videos, sculptures, and drawings that incorporate his pre-colonial Central American ancestry, personal mythology, and autobiography. Through his multidisciplinary studio practice, Maravilla traces the history of his displacement, interrogating the parallels between pre-Columbian cultures and our border politics. Guadalupe Maravilla has performed and presented his work extensively in venues such as the Whitney Museum of American Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art, ICA Miami, Queens Museum, Bronx Museum, El Museo del Barrio, Marte, El Salvador, Central America Biennial 10, Costa Rica, 11, Nicaragua Biennial, Performa 11 and 13, Fusebox Festival, Exit Art, Smack Melon, Rubin Foundation, and the Drawing Center. And we're very lucky to have him presenting with us tonight. And then our first speaker, who will begin after my introduction, is Lauren Williams. Lauren Williams is a designer, organizer, researcher, and educator. She works with visual and interactive media to understand, critique, and reimagine the ways social and economic systems distribute and exercise power. She teaches full-time in the Communication Design Department at the College for Creative Studies and occasionally elsewhere, and I know has been teaching all day today and is very kindly joining us. Lately, her practice and research revolves around Blackness, identity, bodiliness, and social fictions, and examines the ways in which racism is felt, embodied and embedded into institutions. Her work often engages people through collaborations and facilitated experiences in service of imagining and manifesting a more liberated present and future. In the past, she's managed programs and policies aimed at cultivating economic justice. So we're really excited about both Lauren and Lupe being here. And I think they're going to bring out some themes, some different ways of thinking about waiting that will be an interesting spark for conversation to come. So I'll turn it over to Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks, Rit and Avi, for what you do with Shifter, and thank you to all the people involved in making this event happen. I'm really excited to share with you, and also admittedly pretty nervous because I haven't, this is all new work for me. So I'm at a pretty early stage in the work that I had proposed to Shifter, and so a lot of what I'm gonna share with you today will represent thinking and reading and listening that I've been doing, not yet making, so bear with me. And I'll share with you things I've been ruminating on and questions that are shaping this body of work. And so to start, in the spirit of this issue of Shifter Magazine on waiting, what I'd like to start with is offering that Black rage is an emotion born of the experience of chronic waiting. And so to begin, I'll offer that also in practical terms, what I initially planned to do with this body of work was to explore the materiality of Black rage, how it's contained, expressed, and its potential as a shared experience. And I imagined this initially at a minimum as a series of vessels, hundreds of vessels that I would make containing a substance like ink or paint that could be transformed, shattered, broken, opened to produce something else. And because of the shared social nature of the collective experience of rage, of Black rage specifically, I thought that I would pursue some of these questions about form and materiality through participatory approaches, inviting other people in to help me shape these vessels and transform them, and so on. And so I wanted to offer that just to begin so that people have that context as I'm talking about the questions I'm asking. But this has evolved a little bit since I first proposed it, so I'll explain more of how and why at the end. So one of the things that I've been considering lately is, as a starting point, what is Black rage and what is it, how is it constituted? This is a song by Lauryn Hill called Black Rage. That I think does a better job than I could of kind of articulating what's behind it. And she says that Black rage is founded on 2/3 a person, raping and beatings and suffering that worsens, Black human packages tied up in strings. Black rage can come from all these kinds of things. And if it's not evident, this is set to the tune of my favorite things from The Sound of Music. She goes on to say Black rage is founded on blatant denial, sweet economics, subsistent survival, deafening silence and social control. Black rage is found in all forms in the soul. So for me, this is a starting point for this project, but I think the tie between the question of Black rage and the question of waiting, for me, comes from the idea that this idea that Black people have been forced to wait for justice or freedom or to be told that our lives matter, and that it's that waiting that sort of produces the rage that I'm talking about. So when I talk about waiting, I'm referring to this, not a passive waiting, but a waiting that follows demands made by Black people in the US specifically for freedom or justice, and then being told to wait for it. So being told to wait until your life can or does in fact matter. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying that this is a passive experience, that we're passively waiting to be delivered from injustice, for example, but rather that historically the response to those kinds of demands has been to admonish Black people to be patient, to make demands in a particular way that's palatable and acceptable and peaceful, or to accept performative gestures like massive street scale murals like the one that's featured here in DC of Black Lives Matter, or renaming public streets like 16th Street, which is across the street from the White House, instead of substantively shifting the political and economic infrastructures that govern what it actually means to be free. And so when I think of it in this way, I'm reminded of this poem on the screen by Langston Hughes called Harlem. and the many various ways in this really short poem that he examines the materiality of a deferred dream, which to me is another kind of product of waiting, or a function of waiting. So is it a dried up thing? Is it festering? Is it rotting? Is it sweet? He's asking how it behaves, whether it's explosive or not. And I think for me, similarly, that's part of what I'm questioning with my body of work too, is what is the materiality of Black rage? What does it do? And so as I've contemplated the consequence of waiting as well, I've thought a lot about time and how we experience it, how it passes. And so what I'd offer is that the relationship between Black rage and time is something that I find to be both immaterial and extremely precise. So what I mean by that is that it's immaterial in the sense that the rage I hold is simultaneously my mother's rage, my grandmother's rage, and mine. But it's precise in the sense that my own experience of that rage is uniquely mine and uniquely informed by the times when it's been ignited or expressed or contained in particular ways that are unique to me. So this is part of what I wrote in my proposal, but I'll say Black rage accumulates, it swells over time, it shapes our experience of time, it even shapes the lengths of our lives. Its timeline folds back on itself, it winds around, it gets lost, it's nonlinear. Our experience of it moves at the speed of our ancestors' accumulated suffering, an avalanche you can hear coming from centuries away. And it slows and suspends and elongates when we collectively exhale at times when a symbolic policy victory might come through. It exudes urgency instead when ignited by a moment like the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, or Tony McDade. And so as I contemplate time as well, I'm reminded about a question that Jimmy and Grace Lee Boggs asked in Revolution and Evolution in the 20th century. They asked, what time is it on the clock of the world? And for me, this is a question that reorients our relationship to the scale and pace of time. It asks instead how many years are really equivalent to 1 second on this historical scale of human experience. Is what feels like an eternity, for example, really a blip in relation to the larger scheme of history? And so through the summer's moment of social upheaval and protest and rebellion, which might seem like a moment when Black rage is on full display, it's really just that, perhaps, a moment like the rebellions of the 60s compared to the hours or generations through which Black rage has accumulated or been inherited. And so one question I'm reminded of then is how many or how few minutes have Black folks on this clock really waited for freedom, for justice, or to be told that our lives matter? So some of the core questions for me that are really guiding this work are these four. What forms does Black rage take? How is it contained? How is it expressed? And what can it do? So I'll start with this one because to me it's one of the most central. And when I ask what can it do, I'm really interested in its potential, the potential of Black rage. So I'm wondering if it can, for example, transform into joy, into abundant creativity and artistic production. I'm wondering if it can be channeled or transformed or transmuted into other things like loving relationships through sharing food, for example, or growing food together. I'm wondering if it can be buried or condensed or stored into, for example, creative production or expressions of care. And then I'm also interested to shift direction slightly in what Black rage can do, what potential it holds in response to the oppressions that generate it. So I'm thinking a lot about how it feels protest and rebellion, and to take it a bit further, revolution or radical imagination. I'm wondering how it can reshape us in our actions, how it can guide us or direct us, how it transforms us, or how it can be transformed into some other kind of revolutionary energy. So I think it does very much feel protest and rebellion in a way that I feel is pretty direct and understandable, as a rejection of struggling, or a rejection of or struggling against institutions that have mistreated folks. And as it relates to time and waiting, I'm also really drawn to the ways in which protest functions, in a sense, by making other people wait. So by occupying public thoroughfares, for example, inconveniencing people's daily experiences in order to make a point, to make a demand, and to force people to pay attention to something that is otherwise incredibly easy to ignore. I'm also interested on a different level in how Black rage might be able to fuel revolutionary imagination and projections of a different human existence altogether. So Grace Lee Boggs, who I spoke about a moment ago, has talked about this as well. This relationship between protest and visionary organizing. And in 2012, she spoke about the relationship between these two things and said, in sort of a reminder to a bunch of young activists, she told them to focus on visionary organizing rather than protest organizing, because it forces you to exercise creative capacity and move past defensive operations. And so I'm interested in how Black Rage becomes material for that, how it fuels it, how it kind of, how the fuel economy of it works, whether it pushes rebellion further forward or kind of gains more speed and ground through revolutionary action. Another question that for me has been really central so far is about this question of containment. And so to be completely transparent, I don't actually think Black Rage can be contained, but I'm interested in how we attempt to contain it. And so by even raising this question, and as I start to make things, playing with the materiality of form and containment, I'm sort of prodding at this relationship between rage and the bodies or vessels that hold it. So I'm wondering if these are fragile containers, or if they shatter on impact, or if they're completely durable and will withstand some kind of force. I'm interested in what marks they would leave behind if they explode, if they could be reconstituted, for example, after shattering, and things like that. And so I'm interested in these questions because I'm interested in the social implications of Black Rage as a shared emotion across many Black people. And like I said in the beginning, part of what I plan to do with this work initially was to create hundreds of vessels and invite people in to both inform their shape and inform what we do with them. But at the advice of a friend and artist, Jovelyn, who's done work herself on Black Rage, I think what I've realized is that this work has to begin with a more personal exploration of my own relationship to an experience of Black Rage. So for example, I often channel my rage into food. So specifically when I'm having a particularly rageful day, I will go and get chicken wings. There are a lot of other connotations about chicken wings I won't get into, but as a mostly vegetarian person, it's a pretty remarkable thing when I end my day with a bunch of chicken. And so as I contemplate the forms of these vessels, for me, I'm really considering what would happen if they took the shape of things into which I place or bury my own rage. What if they are, in fact, the form of a chicken wing? What else would they hold? Would they hold anything? What would pass through them? Would they be permeable? What kind of relief do I gain from devouring food in this way? And what material or shape would reflect that? And so I think another question here too is like, am I really trying to contain rage in these moments, or am I trying to soothe it or hide from it? Or what is the action that I'm really taking? And then another aspect of this, the personal nature of rage, I think that I'm thinking about a lot lately, is that I'm really preoccupied recently by some of my own lived experiences and the ways that I've seen us Black people turn our rage on our most beloved comrades, friends, people who are clearly committed to the same revolutionary work. And so I've seen that there are ways in which rage also, the same rage that fuels our persistence in this work at times tears our relations apart, and how we justify that often with more rage or disapproval or exasperation and an expectation that we'll endure it silently or accept it as a reasonable part of the ways that we relate to one another or a condition of struggle. And so, like I said, I'm in very early thinking and contemplating stages. And so as I work, I have a feeling this will evolve again and more and in different ways. But for me, I think a lot of the central questions about containment and form and material will stay the same. So thank you again for the invitation to speak. And I'm looking forward to hear from Lupe.
Hello, thank you, Lauren, for that beautiful presentation. I'm so honored to follow you on this day. First, I just want to say thank you to Avi and Rit for inviting me to be part of this. Thank you for my T-List for hosting us. And I'll just jump right in. And I guess thank you for all the audience because we wouldn't be here without you guys. Okay, so I'm going to start by saying a few things. Basically, I've been thinking a lot about, obviously all of us have been thinking a lot about what's happening in the pandemic. And it's extremely difficult time for everyone. And I just want to say like that we're going to get through this, and I know it's difficult, but I'm very optimistic about what's coming in the future. And it's really important to learn the lesson and the lessons that life teaches us, even though they're very difficult. And that's like what my work's about. Basically, my work is autobiographical. I've been doing everything. You know, I was in a boy band in El Salvador when I was during the Civil War in the 80s. I've been working with sculpture and performance and drawings, and I'm a professor, and you know, I'm just kind of like have my hands on everything, right, creatively. So I'll start my presentation, but I'm not going to get into much of that because we'll be here all day. This is a short presentation. So I'm specifically going to focus on my disease throwers at first. And my disease throwers, these are these sculptures that I've been making over the last 2 years. And basically they're they're healing instruments. Our bodies are over 70% water, and we carry trauma, we carry stress and our anxieties in the water that we carry in our bodies. So what these gongs do, these are not the Chinese gongs or the Chinese Asian gongs. These are gongs that were manufactured in the US and in Europe. And it's kind of like a fairly new sound therapy that has been developed in the last, I guess, since the 60s. And basically they're calibrated to different planets or to the different elements, and they shake out the toxins in the water that we carry in our bodies. And how I found out about the actual gongs was I was actually I had cancer about 7 years ago. And this is how I was dealing in treating when, you know, the part where I was actually dealing with the radiation. So it was really helping me because the radiation was extracting a lot of the water in my body and dehydrating me. I was taking care of and taking the stress out of the very little water that I had in my body. So at some point I couldn't walk, and I was presented to this amazing human who was actually one of the founding. He actually he's one of the few people that created this kind of therapy, like this older man, Don Carnew. And he actually gave me a sunbath for an hour, and after that I was able to get up and get on the subway and come home, still with a lot of pain, but before that I couldn't even walk up the stairs. And I realized that that was something that I wanted to, if I overcame cancer, this is something that I wanted to learn to play. Luckily, several years later, I found him and he taught me how to play. And I've been playing for over 2.5 years. And to the point that I'm making sculptures now with the gongs. And I show them in museums and galleries and as sculptures, but they're also activated during these rituals and sound baths that I create in these spaces. And they all have these anatomical body parts that you see here, and they all reference like cancerous organs that had to do with like family members that had cancer or friends. So this is the breast cancer here, and this is the disease thrower, the gumbo. And the gumbo, this is the frog that you see here. And the frog itself, I used the poison of the Amazonian frog to get rid of or actually release the toxins that I was carrying from the chemotherapy that I did. So going to further, it's like when I was dealing with cancer, I had chemotherapy, radiation, 2 surgeries. And along with that, I work with curanderos, shamans, brujos from all over the world, in which they help me either like deal with the side effects of chemotherapy and radiation, or with the damage that the surgery did to my body, or with the actual cancer itself, or in the spiritual aspect of the cancer and where it came from, originated from, and how to heal it. So for example, the Campbell frog, I used it, and it's basically you use the frog and they burned it into your skin. They burn the poison into your skin. So basically the frog is this giant tree frog, and the shamans go and remove the venom from its back. They release it, they don't harm it. Then they grab the poison and apply it to someone that is sick. And that's how I got rid of the toxins of the chemotherapy that I had in my body. And I've been making these sculptures. And also, I guess like I mentioned before, like everything is autobiographical, right? Like in the very beginning, I mentioned that I'm learning an extremely valuable lesson from COVID right now, and like the way the world is. And so along the same time, I was actually, over the last 2 years, I've been I created these holistic healing workshops for undocumented immigrants. I myself was undocumented at 9 years old. I was part of the first wave of children to come to this country unaccompanied in the 80s from El Salvador, and that's still going on now. And I realized that after all the spiritual work that I've done, I've come to the conclusion that the trauma of being separated from my family at 8 years old, and the trauma of being displaced, and the trauma of coming to this new country and being undocumented, somehow this trauma manifested it in my root chakra, which is where my colon is, and eventually manifested into a cancerous tumor, in which is something that I had and something that I overcame. So I am very concerned about the undocumented community that is around me, because like a lot of them are sick. There's depression. There's like so many anxieties in the body that can manifest into illnesses in the future. So I pretty much created these holistic healing workshops for the last 2.5 years that include everything from, basically I start with a sound bath, and then I bring in practitioners that are herbalists, to mycologists, to someone from the city of New York that teaches us how to, where to find organic produce that are affordable, to someone doing Reiki, Tai Chi, to curanderos, embrujos, and brujas from Latin America that teaches about our plants and our healing. And here with a herbalist, she's showing us around and teaching us about like just the weeds that are in the Lower East Side and their medicinal qualities. So this has been going on for the last 2.5 years before COVID hit. So in a way, it feels like it was preparing for me for what I'm doing right now. Here's images of the acupuncture that was done while I was playing the gongs. So when COVID hit, this community that I was working with for the last 2 years was really hit hard. They're undocumented. They lost all their work. A lot of them have no more money to pay their rent and the bills. And I got my stimulus check, and I broke it into 4, gave to 4 families. Then I posted this on Instagram, and all of a sudden, a lot of people started offering donations. And I quickly started passing money around for people to eat and pay rent. And yeah, so everyone that was undocumented, everyone around me in my community was being helped. And I raised about $80,000 to this point. So that's been extremely helpful for a lot of people. And then I came across Juan Carlos Ruiz. And he's a pastor in Bay Ridge, and this beautiful article in New Yorker, you guys should check it out. But he's been helping undocumented communities. And so I kind of started working with him. I started off by delivering hot meals to the point that I now have a weekly run where I packed about 1,500 pounds of rice and beans and maseca corn flour into my truck, and I bring it to the church, and then they break it down and put it into another package of produce that you see here. There's also, they're working on a roof garden right now. And I'm also now doing the sound baths in the church. With social distance, people are in the queues, in the aisles, and we take every precaution necessary. This is some of my seca flour. And now I'm actually working on a creative time project right now. It's gonna open a month from now, October 15th. The location is still a secret, I'm not allowed to say. But it was like really influenced by what I'm doing in this image of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and they put sandbags around it. So when bombs hit, it would kind of give it more support. So I started thinking of the bags of rice and beans and my seca flour that I carry every week to the church. And I came with an idea of making these mounds as a sculpture. And then afterwards, we're gonna donate this to the church and for it to be distributed. Not sure of the scale yet, but more to come later. And right now I'm making these new disease throwers. There are actually these vibrating tables. So you'll be seeing those if you come. And that is pretty much my presentation. It's still, I'm still trying to figure out this creative time project, more information about that soon. But that is pretty much what I've been doing during COVID. And yeah, I guess for the last 2 years. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lupe, and thank you so much, Lauren. As we start the conversation with all of the attendees, I just want to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A function in Zoom to send in comments or questions. I will be moderating and I'll read them out, and Lupe and Lauren can respond. I wanted to open it up to the two of you to respond to each other. One of the things, maybe initial thoughts that I had listening to both of you speak was kind of, as I was listening to Lupe speak, I had Lauren's question in my mind, which is the question of how is rage contained? And I was thinking of the body as a container, the gong as the container, the way in which rage turns in on itself. In the case of Lupe, it turns into a kind of cancer. The way in which it can be turned outwards as a form of generosity, as a form of care. And I found these kind of resonances between your very different kind of research practices. But I'm not sure if Lauren, you had any initial response.
Yeah, no, I heard similar threads that kind of connect us. And I thought that as Lupe, as you were talking about the trauma of coming to the US as an undocumented kid and leaving family and everything that's carried with that experience. I thought not just about your experience traveling and leaving in that situation, but also the experience that made you leave, right? And everything that your parents, I'm sure, experienced and other extended family made me think about sort of intergenerational trauma and the ways that gets passed down literally in our bodies and our DNA. And so I don't have like a conclusive thought there, but just I think we're talking about similar things, even though the sources of trauma are different. In a sense, they aren't, right? like they are different, but that really the forces that forced you to leave are really similar to the forces that I think shaped my ancestors' experiences in the South. And so I think there's something about like recognizing the international relationship between the traumas that are at least our two experiences hold.
Lupe, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah, no, it's interesting how I was when you spoke, I was really thinking about transformation, and you mentioned something about transforming, and can this be transformed into a positive, right? And this is like, I guess this is something that I've been thinking about my whole life, right? But first, like I felt like it's and this is something that one of the curanderos and the shamans kind of always talk to me about. It's like you have to learn to heal yourself before you can heal others, right? And unfortunately, sometimes presented with like cancer and like these very difficult things, and I was very lucky to overcome them. And I'm just like really thinking about how trauma can transform into an illness, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes obviously not every trauma is going to transform into a cancer, but it can transform into a depression. It could transform into different types of illness and diseases in the body, right? So just really thinking about holistically how we can take care of ourselves, and also, you know, trauma can really break the spirit, right? I think it's really extremely important for our spirits to be healthy. Obviously, our diets are important, um, and also like really paying attention to our on a daily to our spirit, because I think that a lot of humanity right now, their spirits are broken. And you know, like I mentioned before too, I'm not really a religious person, but I really bonded with the pastor, and he's extremely progressive. He actually is more progressive than most artists that I know. So it's kind of like interesting to how much healing he's bringing into the world. And like for me, healing right now during COVID is like really thinking about um, healing is buying people food right now, right? Healing is helping someone pay their rent. Like that's where it starts. It's really hard for me to get anyone to meditate if they're hungry. So eh, yeah, so like just really thinking of like how do we heal our communities, and it's a big question, right? And it's like it's a huge project, but like I think it's like really starting to help um, like just with the person next to you, and it's like thinking about the community. So basically, like when I was helping people, I'm still doing it. When I'm handing someone an envelope, and the only thing I ask for them is like, look, if you can help someone in the future, or if your children can help someone in the future, just remember this moment, right? So that in the future, they might not be able to help anyone for a long time, but if they tell their children the story, children might be able to help someone in the future. And that's kind of just starts generating just this positive kind of like just kind of reaction, hopefully, right? So, and that's really like the only thing that I'm asking from them, right? It's just like remember this moment, and if you can help someone later. And that's what happened to me. Someone actually helped me when I had cancer. Someone gave me $1,000 just out of nowhere and said to me, look, if you can help someone later, here you go. And I was able to I remember that, and I was like, oh wow, and now I'm doing it. So let's see how much that spreads. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, right? But I just kind of started rambling about
I
everything.
mean, something you said something about like we can only help other people if we heal ourselves. That's to me that strikes me because it's something that Grace Liebog said also, and she's
Mm-hmm.
for folks who don't know, she's a fixture in Detroit history. She passed in the early 20 aughts or whatever we call it. But she was a Chinese American woman who lived in Detroit and was a Marxist and was involved in a lot of the labor and civil rights movements here. And she wrote and spoke about this idea that we need to kind of heal ourselves and our relations before we can really imagine a new society or a new way of living together. And so I think it's similar, even, you know, I think you were talking about in a physical or medical way, like we need to be healthy in order to help others, but also I think she's talking about it on this other level around in order to heal community or heal from capitalism or like imagine a different way of being, we have to also kind of start with ourselves and our immediate relations too. So.
While we're waiting for a couple more answers from the audience, and please send those through. I had a kind of question for Lauren, which is, I think it's interesting how, to me, from my understanding of your presentation, you don't really think of rage as necessarily a negative thing, as in the healing of rage is not necessarily a thing unto itself. It would mean the transformation of society, changing the conditions that produce rage. I mean, I think in a way, Lupe is saying that too, that like you can't meditate if you're hungry. But I'm kind of curious about that. Like, we often think of trauma as necessarily something that needs to be removed.
Mm-hmm. I guess I also maybe separate the source of rage and the rage itself. Like, I guess I think that the rage I hold is righteous, or anyone who's experienced or inherited a similar thing. But a friend of mine was texting me just now, and I should credit him, Donovan Livingston, who's a professor as well, in a completely different field. But he was mentioning that, like, he asked the question of whether or not rage even should be something we try to contain. And I think that's one of those questions I'm pushing on, because I think Black people are typically told to contain our rage. And however that's expressed, whether it's being loud or whether it's, being joyful, and whatever we do that's joyful, that's disruptive of other people, I think we're taught to hold it in, that it's not professional, things like that. And that not only that, but then also our rage is policed. So if we do in fact express it, both in a state sanctioned way, it's policed, but also by other people and social relationships, it's policed. So I think part of what I'm trying to ask is that question of whether it's a should question, like, should we even be trying to contain it? But beyond that, I'm also just interested in how we try, even because I think it oftentimes, for me, for example, just doesn't work. Like, it staves the expression for a minute, but it's going to find a way out regardless. And so I think I'm interested in how that, like, materially, how I can play around with that. Is it a slow seeping, or is it a explosive experience, or is it not? Is it something that's turned into joy? Because this same friend mentioned that the chicken wing made him incredibly joyful. And so I think part of what I'm asking too is, like, it's been so many hundreds of years, and yet Black people continue to produce joy all over the place, and just like immense expressions of creativity and all this stuff. And so I think there's a way in which rage is fueling that, like, it's not in a way to, like, turn a positive light on rage kind of thing, but there is absolutely a way in which I think our expressions of creativity, or through food, or through music, or through friendship, are absolutely a product in some way of a shared experience, which oftentimes is a rageful one. And so I hope that answers a bit of what you were asking.
Yeah, we have two questions from the audience. Actually, we have one from Emily Garner, but maybe I'll start with Alan Zhang from the audience, and it was asked to Lupe, but I think it could be open to both of you, which is kind of this question of, when did you take up art as a vocation, and what led you to it? Who inspired you? Do you have a mentor or a guide? I would sort of expand that to the question of, like, at moments like this, when we're thinking about helping hungry people and making art, like, how do you sustain a practice as an artist?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. As far as a mentor, actually, when did I start making art? I mean, my mother just told me that I started drawing before I can speak. So I was kind of like just naturally always doing it. And like I mentioned before, I was in a boy band when I was 5 years old in the middle of the Civil War. So I was performing then already. So it just kind of naturally came to me. And I just kind of continued, and eventually got my master's degree at Hunter, my BFA at SVA, and so on. And now I'm a professor. So it's like, it feels like a natural thing. As far as mentor, I haven't had any mentors per se. I had a lot of wonderful people around me, no doubt. And I felt like I've grabbed little things from everyone. Obviously, my mother was my biggest mentor. She's not here with us anymore, but she was such a huge inspiration for me. But mainly, I think that the biggest mentor that I had has been all the challenges that have been presented to me. Because it's always like no matter what it is, I feel like I'm trying to turn everything that's negative into a positive that affects me. So I'm always like, okay, how do I turn this? Like, even when I had cancer, I was like, it was 2.5 years that I was working with curanderos and the shamans, chemotherapy, surgeries, radiation, so all these treatments for 2.5 years. And I think I had like 1.5 days that were like I was negative and I was heavy. I just try to stay optimistic through the whole time, because I was like, what is my lesson right now? What is going to be my lesson? And there was no doubt I was going to overcome it. And I think that's my mentor, is the hardships and the challenges that have been presented to me, because I will always need to react to it in a positive way. How do I flip this? And sometimes it's something that's little. It's just like a small thing, but I'm always thinking, how do I make this negative into a positive, right? Or into a strength? And what's my lesson to be learned? And that's what I've been doing, I guess, my whole life. And it's been my approach. And also, I guess I'm sorry, Craig, you said you extended a little bit to that. How does it feel to make art during COVID? Well, I have 3 full-time jobs. I'm a professor. I am a sculptor right now, making these sculptures and working on my creative time project. And I'm also volunteering and working at the church. So that is it. I have 3 full-time jobs now.
Britt, do you want me to answer it too, even though it was for Lupe?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. So I used to work in DC doing policy analysis and research and kind of program design around economic justice issues. And I got frustrated with the nonprofit industrial complex. And then I decided to go to grad school for design, because I thought there was a capacity for design to intervene in those same spaces in a different way than the tools I had been introduced to in DC so far. And I ended up going to an experimental MFA program at Art Center College of Design. And I think I came out on the other side, I think, a lot more critical of everything, but specifically of the systems I had been a part of before, so nonprofits, the funding structures of nonprofit, the fact that I worked at an organization that did housing policy work and we received funding from Wells Fargo. The contradiction is rich in that. And so I came out on this other side, a lot more critical about design also. Like, having studied it for 3 years, I was less kind of evangelical about the idea that it would save things. And so a lot of my work then has been critical design work. So making things that critique those systems, making constructing futures that don't necessarily need to be real or aren't positing good things, but are just like helping us think about our realities. And so that's sort of the path that I had to what I'm doing right now. I don't teach the type of work that I make. So there's that. But I think I guess the question around, like, in the time of COVID, how's this all working? I think I'm relatively fresh out of grad school. So for me, developing a practice has been new and difficult in that way, because I was teaching full time the whole year. So this summer has been a pretty important period, I think, because I got really involved locally in Detroit in a lot of organizing work around the movement for Black lives and environmental and racial justice work that has always been important to me, but is really kind of, I think, reshaping the way I think about my own work. So that has kept me busy and in some cases gotten me out of the house, probably when I shouldn't have been, but to protest. Yeah.
I think Avi has a question.
Yeah, and we still have some time. We started about 10 minutes late, so it's about 6:30. We said we go about an hour, but maybe we'll go the extra 10 minutes or so if anyone else wants to jump in. I just this is kind of random, but I noticed it really stood out for me, Lauren, in your presentation, how fundamental lists were. How you had the kind of list from Lauryn Hill's song, and then the Langston Hughes poem was kind of list of possibilities. And then I thought about with Grace Lee Boggs, you know, something we talked a lot about with other moments in Shifter is the kind of boring logistical work, you know, like making lists, and how fundamental that is to doing politics. And then as Lupe was talking, I also thought, oh, there's kind of like a grocery list here. And then Lupe, you were kind of talking about lists of indebtedness, you know, how someone had given you something and then passed on. And I was interested just if the listing was just because, I don't know, maybe like, I can't remember anything these days and I'm so scattered, and so I'm really focused on lists and trying to keep things together. Or if there was something for you guys about this kind of idea of listing and listing as the things that we're kind of waiting for, and if that was part of your practice in some way, if that found kind of an aesthetic form, or this, yeah, something of that link there.
I can go first. So I would say yeah, I think I probably do make a lot of lists, but I start usually with, I make a lot of maps. So I think for me, the lists that showed up in this form started as maps that I was drawing, trying to locate like the relationships between containers and expressions and transformations and the sequence of those and which comes first and things like that. So I don't know if that quite answers what you're saying, but yeah, I think there are definitely collections of ideas that get expressed as lists of things, or as maps for me. And I guess I think of them more as maps because it feels like there's more dimension to them than to be a purely a sequential list, because often for me, the things on the list interact with each other. And so as I think about containment and substance, for example, that would be contained, I'm like, neither one can really exist on its own. And so for me, I think the dimensions have to be related somehow in space. And so when I'm generating these lists, they're usually maps.
Yeah, I don't really know if I connect to this question very much. I don't know if I make many lists these days. One of the questions that I ask my students, I always ask them when they're in the sculpture class if they're butchers or not. You know, because we have sculptors that obviously kind of measure everything is super calculated, right? And I'm just like, don't try to be something that you're not. If you're a butcher, let's just go all the way, right? And I guess I see myself as a butcher, so I don't know, Abby, if you're happy with this answer, but I don't make many lists.
Sorry, no. I just thought there's something really, like, I was just thinking as you guys were talking about kind of this listing and waiting and kind of crossing things off a list. But yeah, I mean, I tried to kind of loop it into an aesthetic question, and I know I was forcing that, but I thought maybe.
Well, I think here's another way maybe to think about it too, is that I know, like, I think in my context, at least, I don't know if this applies at all to Lupe, but there have been so many lists of demands made lately in the spaces that are demanding, you know, solidarity or demanding change or demanding defunding or whatever. And so I think there's a way in which, yeah, people are trying to assemble these lists of what it would take to maybe end the waiting, the chronic waiting that I'm talking about. And what I'm finding, at least recently, is that the lists are very different depending on what your ideological orientation is to revolution and to justice and to Black liberation. And so I think for sure lists are coming up in that way, and lists, you know, list of demands by collectives of organizations working together, list of demands, like how we give them and who we give them to, right, is a whole other thing, like whether they're placed in the Detroit Free Press, which is a project I've been part of, or if they're given to Chief Craig, the chief of police in Detroit, and ignored, and then sent up the chain to the feds or whoever. So maybe that's another way to think about it, is lists of demands that for which we're waiting, at least for me.
Thank you, Lauren. I think Emily has a comment or a question for us.
Oh, sorry. I mean, I was just really struck by both of y'all's presentations, but I really would be interested in expanding on, Lauren, you kind of started with the idea of like relations and how that you were kind of discussing the materiality and immateriality of, is it living and what is those relationships? And I'd like to apply more of your kind of thinking to like what Lupe was talking about, because what Lupe was talking about was all about relationships and all about like how his ideas were really cognizant of others, you know, yeah, others kind of response to things. So I didn't really have a formulated full thought, but I was just kind of interested in like hearing like kind of like more of an expansion of that idea of relations and in response to like the idea of waiting.
Lupe, do you wanna take it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I personally didn't talk about with my presentation. I didn't speak anything about. I didn't mention the word waiting once, because I felt all my work is about waiting. Like I was like really literally seeing the hands, you know, one hand handing the envelope to the other. Like one hand is waiting to receive like the donation, right? Someone is waiting to receive the food that's being delivered. The waiting happens when we're meditating. We're kind of waiting, right? Just like really thinking about, I guess the relationships that are built through this, and I think that sometimes it's really beautiful. I think the most beautiful reaction that I get is when people are like, I can't believe, like, you sure you don't want any, like they think like that even at the church, well, not at the church, but when I show up and, you know, as independently to drop off food or to give money, people are just so in shock that they can't comprehend that someone is doing this, right? But it doesn't come from me. I tell them it comes from the community that I'm around. So, and I don't know, just like and then all of a sudden, like, they're like, okay, I can offer cooking for something, or so basically I started constructing these little kind of economies around, like when we were doing sound bites at the church, I hired someone that I helped a couple months ago to cook the dinners for everyone, right? I've been hiring my studio assistants are now all undocumented now also, right? So it's like, it's building these relationships and these kind of micro kind of economies to just kind of help people, right? So it's not just, okay, I'm not going to be able to help you all the time, but I have work for you, right? So just thinking about how those relationships are made, and all of a sudden, like, yeah, my assistant was here all day with me today, and we started talking about what I'm doing, and all of a sudden they become contributors too. They start helping other people now that they're getting back on their feet. So just creating these relationships, it's been really kind of I don't know. I think like during the pandemic, I've met the most wonderful people that I've met in my entire life, and not just one, but so many. It starts with Juan Carlos Ruiz, the pastor, but everyone around him. And I even see Rit on some of my runs sometimes, and it's like, oh my God, Rit's here too, you know, contributing, helping, volunteering. So I don't know. I just really have so much admiration for humanity right now, and super inspiring based on these relationships, you know, because I mean, I know Red with Sky Hiking about 10 years ago, so our relationship was so different. Like, you know, we're different people back then, but also we're in different situation than we are now. But it's really beautiful to see who is really stepping it up right now who's in the forefront. And same goes to everyone that's been protesting as well too, right? Like who's actually doing the work and who's actually being out there. So my relationships with a lot of people that are really kind of coming forward and helping and stepping up, it's like I have such admiration for so many people right now, and it's kind of inspiring because it's like we start feeding each other, helping each other, or inspiring each other. So I don't know if that answers your question, Emily.
No, 100%. I mean, I was just really drawn to the idea of like, how do you like kind of share this work? And that could be from some of my own work, because, you know, every Sunday night I'm cooking for like a thousand, hundreds of people that are coming down the street with a couple of my friends, just because they don't have the opportunity. So I just guess I really love that about your practice, and I really loved how Lauren was really like talking about like different kind of pushings of and ideas of what relations and relationships could be, and in these kind of practices. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I can offer something quick, and then I think we're at time, so we can wrap up. I'll try to make it quick. I think I mentioned in the beginning that I really wanted this to be participatory, and part of that's because the idea came from conversations with a friend and very talented artist named Ellen Rutt, who is white and wanted to make work about questions around what white allyship makes space for, and the extent to which it makes space for Black rage. And so we were having these conversations. We also organized together as part of a group here in Detroit. And so I think for me that like most of my work involves other people. I don't make work about myself, but all of my work is very informed by myself, if that makes sense. So it's informed by the fact that I'm Black, the fact that I'm a woman, the fact of my ancestry, and that my grandparents on my dad's side were sharecroppers, and I very much think about the proximity of our family historically to precarity economically and things like that. But I never make work about myself. And so I think I had this confrontation when I was talking to my friend Jova about this, and she was like, I've done this before. I've done work about rage. You can't bring other people into this until you know what it means for you. And so I think I've actually turned away a bit from making this about other people's relationships to rage, or my shared relationship to other Black people, and what we experience collectively around rage. So that's an interesting pivot for me, but I think I still can't get away from the fact that Black rage is significant because it's Black rage. It's not just rage, it's rage that people who identify in this way share. And so I do feel like I need to find a way to bring that in, and that I made some comments earlier about how rage gets recycled or turned in on Black relationships, and especially in organizing spaces and things like that. And so I think there's no way for me to get away from it, which is, I don't want to get away from it. I very much want it to be part of this work. But to me, it comes in so many ways, whether it's the fact that I'm inheriting parts of this emotional experience from ancestors, or that there are ways in which rage is expressed between me and other people that I work with or organize with, and the fact that it's a shared experience. For me, all of this is relational, and I can't and wouldn't want to escape from that. So.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I was, as you were both saying that, I kind of had this image in my mind, the image from Lupe's work of the frog whose poison is being used to get rid of the chemotherapy, which in turn is a poison that's getting rid of the cancer. That these sort of things that might be seen in separation as something negative, when placed in relation to other things, is actually a form of healing.
Yeah, that's profound, yeah.
So with that, I just wanted to thank you both for your candidness and your generosity, and thanks to everyone who came and participated or listened. I just want to let everyone know that on October 8th, we have our next discussion featuring Kevin Jerome Everson, and Nicole Fleetwood. And so that would be great if all of you wanted to come back for that. Thank you so much.